Good morning, Richard here, and welcome to today's video. So all the dials and buttons and whatnot on today's cameras, and it's no wonder things can sometimes get a little bit confusing, especially if you've just started out in the world of photography. So I am here today, hopefully today, to make things a little bit easier and to try and introduce you to some of the settings, or the three main areas which make the picture basically. So it's a quick chat to understand shutter speed, aperture and ISO. So there are three main things or main controls in your camera that you can adjust to make your picture brighter or darker basically, along with other more complicated settings. For example, do you need to higher the shutter speed because a photo is blurry? Do you need to open the aperture to let in more light or to get a shallower depth of field? Have you run out of options? Do you need to crank up the ISO? Does any of that make sense? If it doesn't, stick around because I'm going to show you how they all affect each other with some nice pretty graphics and stuff. Then it will hopefully make it a really simple way to explain how adjusting one of those things affects the picture and how you then have to adjust another one to compensate for the first adjustment, and so on. So basically, first of all, shutter speed. That is that determines how much light enters the camera and how long this sensor is exposed to light. You need a fast shutter speed to freeze some action, or you need a slow shutter speed if you want to get motion blur or have dreamy water type photos that you may have seen. You then have aperture, which the lower aperture number, say 2.8, will let in more light, will give you a shallower depth of field, making the background blurry, or the higher number will give you a wider depth of field, i.e. have more of the picture in focus, but the compromise to that is it lets in less light. And finally, ISO, which is that determines how sensitive the sensor is to light. So again, the lower number, the less sensitive it is to light, the higher number, the more sensitive it is to light. Does that make sense? Okay, stick with me. Each adjustment affects the other. So if you do change one, then you are likely to going to have to change the other to keep the exposure as it was before. Let me explain in a little bit more detail. So again, really quickly, shutter speed, high number, less light, low number, more light. Aperture, low number, more light, high number, less light. And ISO, low number, more light. Sorry, low number, less light, high number, more light. Simple. So let's have a look at something on the screen now that hopefully will make this a little bit clearer than me rambling on about it. The three things: shutter, aperture and ISO. Let's say you're shooting something at 1/20th of a second, but it's coming out blurry. To make sure that it isn't blurry, you need to higher the shutter speed, but that lets in less light. So you may want to lower the aperture, i.e. lower the number so you let in more light. But what if you've already maxed that out on your lens and you've gone down as far as you can? So the only option now is to increase the ISO. Now this will make the camera's sensor more sensitive to light, and it may introduce some noise depending on how high you go, and also how good your camera may be at or in low light conditions. So there's all these three things affect each other, and it's important to get the balancing right for the picture that you want to take. So for me personally, I always try to shoot at 100 ISO because that means that it's the type of photography I do. I want it to be clean. I'm not interested in grain or noise. So I start there. I then set then it depends on what I'm going to shoot. If I'm shooting something that's moving quick, I will be more focused on shutter. But if I want to have a control over the depth of field, I will have more emphasis on the aperture. Let's put that up with some pictures. So for this shot, I wanted to make sure as much of the scene was in focus as possible. So I went for a higher aperture. Nothing's moving, so as long as I didn't get motion blur or I didn't get camera shake blur, then the shutter speed wasn't. It could be 100, it could have been 1000. It didn't matter for this picture. I was more worried about the aperture. I wanted a higher number, and i.e. a wider depth of field, so that more of the picture that I'm looking at is in focus. But on this photograph, you can see that I wanted to make the subject pop. I wanted to get the background blurry, so I went down to f2.8, I think, and that meant that the depth of field was shallower, i.e. less of the picture was in focus. It also let in more light, so I might have to have increased the shutter speed. Excuse me. So there's the payoff. You don't know, to keep that exposure level, you've got to be able to adjust all of your settings and understand exactly what they do when you adjust them. The key for me and the key for most people is you have a picture in your mind and you make sure you set the camera up using the primary setting that you want. So you manipulate the camera, you set the camera with your main objective as the priority. So if you want to control the depth of field, your priority will be aperture. If you want to freeze the subject, your priority will be the shutter speed. Then once you've set that, you then make sure you adjust the other settings to give you enough light to get the picture you want. So you're photographing somebody skateboarding, so you need a high shutter speed, 800, 1000. Now let's do this. You're photographing a bird. You know that birds are moving fast, you're going to need a high shutter speed, so you turn it up to 1000, say. That is going to let in less light, so you may have to lower the aperture to give you the light that you need, and if that still isn't enough, you may find yourself having to increase the ISO, and it's a real balancing act. And the better the camera is, it gives you a better range of what you can get, because you can, and the better lenses obviously, you can go lower on the aperture to 2.8, you can go higher on the ISO to 6400, 10,000, 12,800, whatever camera you've got. But it's just making sure you get all those three things correct, and that you know what adjusting one will do to the other settings. I guess the bottom line is, in this super quick video, unless it's absolutely necessary, do not sacrifice your primary objective of what you need. If you need 1000 shutter speed, try and get 1000 shutter speed. You can fix noise, so if you have to raise the ISO, you can fix the noise in post. You cannot fix a blurry photo in post. So it's important that you choose the right priority for your picture that you want to take, whether that be aperture for depth of field, say, shutter speed to freeze the action or not. And then ISO is kind of used as a compensation where the others may not give you enough of a margin to get the exposure that you want. I hope I've explained that well. Hopefully with these graphics I've showed you on the screen here will make it a little bit easier, and it might have helped. Hopefully it will have done so. The best thing to do is to get out there, use the camera, take some pictures, try different settings, have a look at the camera. Just change one setting so you know. If you're taking pictures of your child in the park, then go into shutter priority mode, for example, which is normally T on most cameras. Set it at a figure 500 for the second, for example. Take a picture. If it's blurry, make the number higher, which will let in less light, but you're in shutter priority, so the camera will make some adjustments for you, but you will see the difference that it makes. Go down to a 20th of a second and see how blurry your kid is. Go up to 2000th of a second and see how fast, how pin sharp and how frozen in time your kid is. But you'll see what it does to the other settings. Look at the difference of the aperture between the two, or the ISO between the two, and you'll be able to see how one affects the other, and you'll understand how that particular element of your picture works. So that's it. I'm not going to waffle on anymore. I will leave it there. Thank you for watching. I hope you found that useful. Leave me a comment down below if you've got anything to say. Give me a thumbs up, like the video. That's the best thing you can do for me, if you don't mind. And subscribe if you're not already. And until next time, I will leave it there and look forward to seeing you in the next video.